Hello and welcome to Talking Aussie Books, a weekly podcast bringing readers and writers of Australian fiction together. I'm Claudine Tonellis. As an avid reader and passionate advocate for Australian fiction, I have made it my mission to spotlight local talent. So if you're looking for your next read or simply want to learn more about the Australian literary scene, this podcast is for you. Grab yourself a cuppa, sit back and relax. This episode is brought to you by HarperCollins Australia. Listeners, today's episode is my last recording for 2025 and I am going out with a bang. I'm talking to a debut Aussie author whose book is being touted as one of the biggest releases of the summer. Now, if you loved The Crown and devoured all the drama when Prince Harry and Meghan Markle stepped away from the royal family and have wondered what that might have looked like behind the scenes, then this is the perfect book for you. It's been released simultaneously here in Australia, the UK and the US and is already enjoying some incredible notoriety in these early weeks following publication. The book, of course, is called The Heir Apparent by Rebecca Armitage, a Tasmanian author and ABC journalist who, it will not surprise you to learn, has reported extensively on the royal family in the course of her work. Now, after positively inhaling this book this last weekend, I am in awe of Beck's immense talent and am more than a little thrilled to have the chance to chat for the podcast today. Welcome, Beck, and hugest congratulations to you.
Oh, thank you, Claudine. I'm thrilled to be here. It's been a crazy couple of weeks, but I'm glad we can have a little chat.
Indeed, me too. Now, the book has hardly been out and already there's so much hype surrounding it. So how does an author from Hobart living a life of relative anonymity cope with the kind of overnight fame that this book has generated?
Yeah, look, when I'm away from a screen, my life is completely the same. You know, my friends are very proud of me, but they still see me as the same person. So for the most part, yeah, it's this incredible thing that I can't quite believe has happened. But yeah, I'm still the same old person I was a couple of weeks ago.
So, Beck, look, I received an advanced reading copy of this book, and the spine indicated that it would be a February 2026 release, but it was brought forward by a couple of months. And I personally can see why the publishers might have decided to do that. But I wondered, did this have anything to do with a recent book club pick, or did that get
Yes.
decided beforehand?
No, so we were going for February in the US, the UK, and Australia. And then Reese Witherspoon wanted it for her book club, but the proviso was that she needed it for December because the first few slots for next year were already taken. And everyone was very happy to make that change. So that is why we've moved it up a few months.
So tell me about that. How did that happen? I'm imagining so many books must cross her desk or her team's desk.
So I didn't know anything about it. My American publisher did not tell me for good reason because I would totally freak out. So there's a scout for Reese's book club who looks out for books that would fit their sort of remit, which is they want books written by women or about women. I think they do occasionally have a crime book, but nothing too, really gory and depressing. Like they want things that are broadly uplifting. So Reagan Arthur, my US publisher, submitted to them. And then I think it goes to a panel of people and then they draw up a short list and then that short list goes to Reese Witherspoon herself and then she picks the book of the month. But I did not know any of that until I got the email saying, congratulations, Reese Witherspoon's picked you. So that was a huge shock.
Indeed, it must have been. So then how does it feel for you to see her on Instagram with her millions of followers holding up your book?
Oh, completely surreal. Like, so I can't even, I've only watched the video a few times, like I can't really cope with it. So I think it'll take me a few months before I can watch it again. So I've only seen it twice and then I was like, I can't deal with this. So I still feel like there's been a mistake or something. Like I can't believe she read it, let alone picked it. Like that was so crazy to me. But, I love Reese's book club. I love every choice she makes each month. She's got great taste. So, yeah, to be in that club is just such a huge honor.
Fantastic. Well, I'm hoping that this will go a little bit further for you and that she might pick it up for one of her productions or something like that. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing?
Look, it would. I've been warned that Hollywood always moves very slowly. Like I've had some interest from producers, but this is a particularly rough time for the film industry. So if it happens great. I'm still thrilled just to have a book deal. Like, so when people talk about screen deals, it's just like, what? So I'm happy with the possibility of it, but I've been told that it's really like pushing a boulder up a hill. So it certainly won't be on TV screens or anything like that in the very near future.
Well, fingers crossed for you, but I totally understand where you're coming from. I think it's a very healthy attitude that you have at this point in time. Well, like millions, probably billions of people around the world, I've always been fascinated by the British royal family, the institution that has survived and some might argue thrived despite so much controversy and scandal over the years. And I'm thinking in particular about what happened between Charles and Diana with Camilla waiting in the wings. And then, of course, there was Harry and Meghan and the subsequent estrangement from the royal family. The Queen's death, though not in itself dramatic, the shake-up that's followed, her death has been remarkable. And now, of course, we have Andrew being stripped of his royal title. So much has been written about this family, much of which is often difficult to discern if it's fact or fiction. So, how does someone like you pierce the veil of mystery surrounding this family and give such authenticity to this story?
Yeah, so I am a journalist at the ABC, and so we cover royals as part. I work on the international desk, so our remit is basically everything beyond Australia's shores. So that's, wars and elections and political scandals, like everything. But royals is part of that because Charles is our head of state. He is the King of Australia, which is easy to forget a lot of the time, but he is. So that makes him relevant to our audience. So we were just, because as you say, it's been such a tumultuous period over there. There was so much happening that it was kind of all hands on decks because the London bureau had the Ukraine war. Like they were so busy that I just sort of started pitching in and I found them really interesting. So I just kept doing it more and more. Because I'm in Australia, I am not part of the royal rota. So that's kind of like the press pool that follows Charles and the family around. And that's exclusively for British reporters. So I'm not part of that. But I noticed very quickly that people don't really believe the things that they read in the tabloids about the British royal family because it's always framed as, Charles is upset about this according to a friend or a
Mm.
source who works in the palace. So it's all very vague. And so I think what I wanted to do was to analyze that and critique it as much as I could for the audience to understand what that meant because it became pretty clear to me that while those reports are rarely true, or it's hard to assess whether they're true or not, someone's planted that leak in that tabloid for a reason. And so it became clear which royal liked which outlet. So Prince Harry really likes People magazine. Like he goes for the big ones like BBC. Charles's his court seems to really appreciate a few people at the Daily Mail. William really likes the Times of London. So once I got that sense that they all had their preferred journalists and their preferred outlets, it was like, okay, so they are planting these messages in these stories. I can't tell you as a journalist if it's true, but I can tell you they want you to read that, and it's part of their agenda for their audience to read that. So in every story, I try to disclose that and explain what's going on. So it's like they're kind of speaking a secret language, this family, where they're not in a group chat. They don't pick up the phone and talk. Often they're telegraphing messages back and forth via the media and they cloak it all in this, according to a friend or according to a palace source. But my theory is that those sources are not planting that information in the press without the express approval of the royal in question. So it's just about trying to explain that. So in terms of piercing the veil, I don't know how possible that is, but I can explain sort of the industry that surrounds them and the practices that they engage in to hopefully give you a better sense of what's going on.
Now, Beck, I'm sure by now listeners are absolutely dying to learn about the premise of the story. So I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about it.
So, The Heir Apparent is about a young woman called Lexi who is a princess. She's third in line to the British throne, but she is estranged from the royal family. She's got big questions about the monarchy. Most of it's been triggered by her mother's death when she was 17 years old. So, she flees to Australia. She becomes a doctor. She's working as a medical resident. She's living in Hobart with her friends. She's, secretly in love with her best friend, Jack. But right as she's settling into that life and her and Jack's relationship is about to change, her father and brother are killed in a skiing accident. And a helicopter spins into view and it's a palisade saying, "You have to come with me because you're it now. You're the heir to the throne." So she goes home and her grandmother, the Queen, gives her a year to decide if she'll stay and embrace this fate and take the throne or if she will give it all up and move back to a more private life in Australia. But she's got a lot of secrets, and if anyone finds out these secrets, it's going to be very difficult for her to actually ever be queen.
Yeah, indeed. Just a fascinating story. We have obviously just heard about your work and your coverage of the royal family as part of your work, but what sparked the decision to begin the story and where did Lexi come from?
So I think it all started in probably about 2018. I was asked to get some pictures together of Harry and Meghan's wedding celebration, so leading up to the wedding. And at that point, I didn't know a lot about the royals and didn't really follow them or know much about them. But I remember thinking very clearly that Harry looked stressed and not to be marrying Meghan. I think they are very in love and remain very in love. But I think my theory now is that he, like Diana, has no poker face. So his emotions are always very plain and you can always see how he's feeling where the others are probably better at covering it up. But he just can't, whatever he's feeling, it's present there. So I got this sense that he was quite stressed and I didn't know why. And we now know that, there was a lot of tension in the family at that time. And then he eventually left. But at that moment, I just remember thinking, what happens if you're royal but you don't want it? Because obviously it comes with a lot of privilege, but it also comes with a lot of pressure. And if you're more of a private person, what happens? Like, are you allowed to leave? How does that work? Has anyone ever left? And so I just had all these questions, and it just sort of planted the seed of Lexi inside me. I wanted it to be a woman because I wanted to examine, the princess industrial complex in a way, because, all women are born told through Disney movies and everything else that being a princess is like the ideal femininity. So I really wanted to pierce that and look at what that actually is like from the inside. So I knew Lexi would be a woman. And I knew that she would not want the life that she'd been born into. But I didn't actually start writing it for 5 years. Like, I'd never written a novel before. And I was very busy with work, but I just couldn't stop thinking about it. So it got to the point, it was January 2023, New Year's Day. It was my New Year's resolution to just write it for no other reason than to get it outside of me. And I wrote the first draft in 6 months.
That's
It'll
incredible.
never happen to me again. I know it'll never be able to do that again.
Yeah, but there was a lot of incubation period, wasn't there? Like from 2018
Yeah,
to
yeah.
2023, there was a lot going on and you had a lot of material to work with, obviously.
And a lot, yeah, I didn't even have an outline. Like I just sat down and wrote it from start to finish because it had 5 years to sort of map it out in my brain. So that was a luxury that will probably never come again.
I love that. I think we need to pay homage to the opening line of this story, Beck, which I think will become iconic. And I wondered if you would like to read it out.
Yes, I'm glad you liked the first line because I really thought of the first line long before I wrote it. So it is. I was about to kiss my best friend when the helicopter came. That's it. That's the first sentence.
She's in the middle of nowhere. She's on, I don't never know how to say this. I always say Maria Island, but I think locals say Mariah Island.
Yes, it's Mariah. I'm not sure why, but it is pronounced Mariah Island. I don't know why they don't spell it like Mariah Carey spells her name, but yes, it's Mariah Island. So she's camping with her friends, and including her best friend Jack, who she secretly loves. And then they're just about to kiss as the sun rises, and then they hear this sound, and it's a helicopter coming, and it's the Palisade who's there to tell her she's got to come back to London with him.
Beck, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about Lexi's life up until that point at which we meet her. What's happening for her?
Yeah, so Lexi, she's 29. I really liked that idea of being on the cusp of the 30s, where, you're still very much a child in your 20s. But she's also a doctor, so she's working as a medical resident in Hobart and she's living on a vineyard. So basically, once she left the royal family, she was stripped of her security. And so she needed to find a safer place to live. So her uncle, who's helped facilitate her escape, sets her up with a colleague of his, Jack, who owns a vineyard. So it's fenced and it's a little bit remote. It's a bit outside of Hobart. So it's sort of this place where she can feel secure. And while they're living together as housemates, this love blooms between them, but it's very unacknowledged because he's completely intimidated by who she is. She's so traumatized and so closed off that she's never going to make a move and he's too intimidated to make a move. So, they're just stuck in this friendship. And I think the main thing about Lexi is that she is very, very traumatized. I think she's got PTSD. Her mother's death really haunts her. And she's a very high functioning person, but she is a very damaged person. And this event, the death of her father and her brother, is sort of what forces her to not only consider her future in a real way, but also to reckon with the past.
And what I loved about this is that everybody knows who she is. It's no secret. She's not sort of hiding in Hobart. Everybody knows that she's this princess that's shunned royal life. So, at first people are not quite so friendly. And I think, in fact, she says that she didn't really have any friends when she got to Hobart.
When I originally conceived of the story, I was living in Sydney, which is where I'm from. And so it was going to be set in Sydney, and it just didn't quite work for me. And I wasn't sure what the problem was. But then My husband, who's from Hobart, we moved here during the pandemic and then just never left. And once we got here, I was like, oh no, it's set in Hobart. That's the right location for it because it needed to be. I think Sydney is just a little too glamorous and big, and Hobart is very remote. And I knew from the real world example of Queen Mary of Denmark that, when she comes here, no one bothers her ever. And when journalists come here, even if they're doing like nice stories about her and they just want quotes about her childhood, no one will talk to them. It's a tight knit community that looks out for its own. So I knew that people would be like, oh my God, who is this person who's moved here? And they would probably stay away from her. But once she's welcomed into Jack's world and she's sort of got the tick of approval of like a long established family, that would be it. But no one would take her photo or chase her down the street like that. I just could not imagine people here doing that because we don't put on airs. We don't care about celebrity. So I knew it was a place that a princess could walk the streets and have a job, and that would not be totally crazy.
So, as you say, Beck, the story starts when a tragic accident takes Lexi from third in line to the throne to the heir apparent. And in the book, there is talk of an heir apparent and an heir presumptive. And I wondered if you could talk us through the difference.
Yes. So these are real terms that royals use. The heir apparent means that you are first in line to the throne and there's no possibility that anyone can come ahead of you. So it's yours. So when Charles was born, he was the heir apparent because he was the firstborn son of a monarch. Now, the rules have since changed. We haven't seen them in action, but when Kate and William had their child, they changed it so if it was a girl, she would be the heir apparent. But up until that moment, and we haven't seen it in practice, only boys could be heir apparents. So if a woman finds herself at the top of the line, like say Elizabeth, that is because there's been a whole bunch of tragedies or her parents haven't produced a male heir. So she's kind of like the best option. But the heir presumptive means that you are presumed to inherit the throne one day, but the crown holds out hope of a boy. And so when Queen Victoria became queen at the age of 18, she succeeded her uncle. The proclamation literally said, Victoria is queen unless her auntie, the queen, happens to be pregnant with a boy right now. And her auntie was in her 50s. She'd just nursed her husband to his death. So she was like, I'm not pregnant. I can assure you there's no boy coming. But the system just flagrantly, openly, always has held out hope for a boy. So in this book, Lexi is technically heir presumptive, but her grandmother, who also came to the throne through tragedy, is just like, I'm dispensing with all these terms. She's it. The only person who can stand in Lexi's way is Lexi herself. Like she's going to inherit the throne. There's no other man unless she steps back.
Now, there are a lot of dukes and duchesses and dowager duchesses as well in this book, lords and ladies, earls too, and their associated rules regarding inheritance, along with references to proper etiquette, customs, and traditions. It's all so very complicated, but you've managed to get your head around all of this. So tell me what resources you used for this purpose.
Most of it I managed to figure it out in the process of covering them as a journalist because I'd constantly be like, the Duke of who? The Duchess of what? Like, who are all these people? And they've got multiple titles and I don't understand the ranking system. So I was constantly researching and clarifying what it all means. And I still have to double check. Like even, I did a massive fact check on this book because it is so complicated. And I think even only probably the aristocrats themselves really understand it. I was constantly on Google. I was constantly in the history books. But yeah, it's not something that I can easily explain off the top of my head because it's just such a foreign system to us as Australians. And it is just so intricate. But yeah, it's something I've constantly got to double check because I'm just like, the who? What do you mean? What's a Marquess? Like, I don't understand all these terms. Like, it's just so foreign to me as an Australian.
There was mention of some kind of like aristocracy Bible.
Oh, yes. I can't remember what that's called, but there is a book that Queen Elizabeth used to love this book and she'd get it printed every year. And it's got every single aristocratic house in England and their family trees. And it's called colloquially the Snob's Bible. It lists every family and every duke, every member of the aristocracy. And apparently Queen Elizabeth used to love it. Every time it was delivered to her house, she was like, oh, here it is. And she'd look through it. But yeah, to me as an Australian, I'm just like, the what? The Snob's Bible? Why would you want that in your house?
It's so far removed from the kind of society that we live in. It's so difficult to wrap our heads around.
Totally. And I think Australia, we're a society where if you really respect someone in a position of authority, the way you show that is by being really casual with them and treating them like they're a friend. But England is not like that. And so that was really, I had to really work on that in the drafts. Like my British publisher was like, no one would ever say that to the Queen, or, we've got to dial that back a little bit. You're being a little too Australian here.
Wasn't it great that you had somebody to guide you in that respect?
Oh, totally. My British publisher, Priel, she was really good because I did do extensive research, but there were just a few things like British people call pants in England is underwear and trousers is what we would call pants. So she's like, okay, everyone's running around in their undies. We're going to have to change this. And she said that aristocrats say Happy Christmas, not Merry Christmas. So those little details, like she's entirely responsible for keeping that sort of accurate.
Okay, so while reading this book, I was drawing parallels between documented events in the lives of the actual British royals and events that you have described in this book, but you've kind of mixed them up and turned them on their heads, which I thought was so very clever. And I mean, even things like, and I believe, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, but Kensington Palace is Cumberland Palace, Clarence House is Wolseley House, and Windsor Castle became Watford Castle.
Yes.
And so was it important to you to create this kind of parallel universe rather than to use real places? And if so, why?
Yes, so there's an author's note right at the beginning that the only real person in the book is Lexi's ancestor, Barbara Villiers, who was a real person. She was a mistress to Charles II in the 17th century. I take history in a weird turn and make Barbara his wife. So he marries her, they have a child, then he dies and she becomes Queen Regent, ruling until their son is old enough to take over. So I've just made things very, very familiar, but it's happening in a very slightly alternate universe. So the names of all the duchesses and the palaces, they're similar, but they're different. I didn't want people to be annoyed to the point of trying to figure out who was who and where was where. So it's just like, it looks kind of like the world you're familiar with, but it's definitely happening in an alternative universe.
As you mentioned before, Queen Eleanor gives Lexi a year to decide if she will choose duty over the life that she has wanted for herself up until that point. And Queen Eleanor, much like the late Queen Elizabeth herself, was catapulted onto the throne in unusual circumstances. And in the course of this year, Lexi has cause to examine some of the, shall we say, less palatable truths about the crown and thinks that perhaps in her role, she might be able to redress some of those issues in some way. But I think it's fair to say that she encounters resistance, doesn't she?
Yeah, I think if you look at the main people in the book are, so Queen Eleanor is sitting on the throne, Lexi gets it next, but if she doesn't get it, her uncle Richard will get it. And the three of them have very different ideas about what a monarch is for. So Eleanor sees a monarch as a force of stability and tradition. They remain the same while everything around them changes. So she wants any change to be incremental, a very softly approach, where Lexi comes in and thinks, well, maybe I'll be a radical queen and I'll completely upend everything and I'll confront the sins of the past like colonialism and I will be an activist queen. And then Richard is kind of like a Henry VIII figure who just wants to conquer. And he just believes that as a man, he's entitled to it. So I'm not taking a side in that, but I think it's giving you a sense of how different potential monarchs see the throne, and it's up to you to decide whether you think who's got the right idea or if you think it should exist at all.
There was an interesting thing that the Prime Minister in the book says to Lexi about the three rights of modern sovereignty. And I wondered if you could talk more about this and what this reveals to Lexi about her role.
Yes, this is real. So Jenny, who's the Prime Minister, says that the three rights of the modern sovereign. So this is like when they're mostly just a constitutional monarch. So they're not like Henry VIII where they get to decide everything. There's a parliament and there's a prime minister, but the monarch still has a role. And so she says the three rights of the modern sovereign are to consult, to encourage, and to warn. And that comes from a man called Walter Bagehot, who in the English Constitution. So he was sort of a scholar a few hundred years ago. That is what monarchs believe their role is. So the British Prime Minister goes to see the King or Queen of England every week to discuss, what their bills are, what the matters of Parliament are. And so, yeah, basically the system says you can be there to advise, you can be a sort of a consultant. And if you, as someone who engages with the work of Parliament every day, you read every act, you can warn. So you can say, I think that's going to be a problem. It's up to the Prime Minister to take that advice or leave that advice, but you're sort of like an overarching consultant in the government system.
You mentioned colonisation a little bit earlier, and I think it's fair to say that Lexi thinks that she's going to use her role to address some intense feelings of guilt, perhaps we could say, about the role her family has played in colonisation. You know, that's a theme that much of the world has reflected on in recent times, and particularly, I would say, here for us in Australia. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and why you were concerned to highlight this with Lexi's story?
Yeah, I really thought I couldn't do this book if we didn't face colonization head on, particularly since she's living in Australia, specifically Tasmania, where the pain of colonization is just so present. Like, this is a place that feels really haunted because the genocidal acts were just absolutely devastating here and in other parts of Australia. So it felt negligent if I didn't discuss that and have her think about those big questions about how do you take on this role when that role has caused so much damage and so much pain to so many people over hundreds of years. So she has to reflect on the fact, can she be comfortable sitting on the throne if she acknowledges what's happened in the past and tries to at least call it out? I don't know if it's possible to make amends, but she can start with an apology. She can attempt a reconciliation process. So I just think, given that she was living in Australia, it had to be a big part of the book. And it is actually a big factor in the decision she eventually makes, is whether she thinks she can actually pull this off. Because what's the point of being the head of a system that you think has caused this much damage to so many people?
Now, you probably couldn't have imagined that at the time your book was published, the monarchy would be facing yet another scandal, resulting in stripping the former Prince Andrew of his royal titles because of his association with a convicted sex offender, amongst other things. And this former prince, his status within the royal household before the death of the Queen and the kinds of privileges he enjoyed echoes in the character of Prince Richard in your book. He was such a Machiavellian character, to say the least. So was he direct inspiration?
There's definitely a kernel of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor in Richard. Also, there's a lot of Richard III, who probably killed his nephews to take the throne. So there's a lot of those sort of brutal male figures throughout royal history in Richard. But I think my main goal with Richard was that I wanted to discuss the dangers of minor royalty, because if you're the heir, you know, you've got certain financial arrangements, like you've got a duchy so that you have plenty of money coming in, you get a lot of attention, your power increases with age. But if you're born further down the line, like Andrew, your entire existence is to be a spare. You're a backup plan in case your older brother or sister dies. And I think that can be a really interesting psychological study in what that does to you, because when you're a baby, your job is just to exist. When you're a child, your job is to be cute in photos. When you're a young man, your job is to get married, to be dashing and charming, to bring, you know, glamour to the royal family. And then as soon as your brother gets married and has children of his own, you're almost obsolete, because your chances of taking the throne just diminish with every passing year and every child born. And the issue with royals who are considered working royals is that they are given a salary by the taxpayer, but the salary is about £200,000. I think that's what Andrew was on at the end, which to me sounds great. I would love that. That's a great amount of money. But if you've been born into unimaginable luxury and you're around rich people all the time, that's not enough to live on the kind of lifestyle that you want. And you can't go out and get a job, because your job is to be a working royal. So you're kind of limited in that you have this £200,000 income. Obviously, your rent is low, you get this great property. But if you have Jeff Bezos's taste and you're living on like a London banker's salary, there's a danger there that then you become susceptible to foreign agents, to shady friends who want something from you. And that's obviously what we've seen with Andrew. And that's not an inevitable path. You look at his sister, Princess Anne, who was born in the exact same circumstances, but was even less useful to the crown than him, because she immediately slid below her brothers in the line of succession. So her chances of taking the throne was zero. But this is a woman who does more charity work than anyone else. She was an equestrian. She is a very happy woman. She's been married. She's got kids. Like, she's found a productive way to live within that circumstances. But I think it's clear Andrew denies a lot of the allegations against him. But I think it's very clear that he could not cope with the luxurious tastes he had and his inability to fulfill them without making really bad choices in terms of the company he's kept.
And I guess the same could almost have been said about his former wife.
Yes, exactly. And they're an interesting pair. I think I would say that Sarah Ferguson, her spending is really frightening. You hear a lot of reports that she just, because she can earn money, clearly, she's very good at making money, but she just burns through cash. And that is just so dangerous because if you're a foreign spy, these are very useful people because they love attention, they love luxury, they love stuff, which just makes them so susceptible to being groomed. And the thing about most spies is they don't actually realize they're spies. Like they've been recruited and trapped. And by the time they realize it's too late. And so I think that's what made Andrew and Sarah just so vulnerable. And look, they are responsible entirely for the destruction of their own lives, but you can see why they were targeted by the people who went after them.
Beck, I wondered if in the course of your research for this book or even in the writing it, were there things that you learnt about the royal family and royal life that surprised you or that you didn't know beforehand?
Not really. I think mostly it was a process where I'd write a story about, say, when Queen Elizabeth died, she was obviously a very important figure in the 20th century. So there were a lot of stories about the person she was. They were very complimentary, but we wanted to grasp with, the negative sides of monarchy. And so Avani Diaz, who was the India correspondent, she came to us with this story about this jewel in one of the crowns that was stolen off a child Maharaja. And Queen Victoria wore it as a brooch, and now it sits in this crown. Every time I heard something like that, it was like it was bookmarked in my brain where I was like, that's a really good thing. That's just so incredible and just ridiculous. And so it was like it was filed away in my brain. So I littered all those pieces through the novel, often fictionalizing them here and there. But most of the surprise came through my journalistic career. And I just gathered all those little anecdotes and then put them through the book.
The heart of this story is a love story, Beck, a story as old as time. And Jack is a commoner, and Lexi doesn't see how he can fit into her life as a royal. But in real life, there have been so many examples of royalty marrying out of or outside of the aristocracy. And I guess it is a little bit hard to discuss without giving away spoilers, but suffice it to say that his status as a commoner isn't the only reason she has for denying their love.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest obstacle for them is her trauma. I think she really fears the only unconditional love she's ever experienced in her life is from her mother, and then her mother dies. The idea of experiencing it again is terrifying to her because she knows that the pain of losing it is so great. She just doesn't think she could cope with it. And that's who Jack is. By being her friend, he likes her as a person. He doesn't care about her titles. He looks up to her. He admires her. He doesn't care who she is. He just loves her as a human being. And while she would love that, she also knows she's not going to cope if she's going to lose it. So I think that's the biggest obstacle. But the thing with Jack is that he comes from a very, very political family. So his parents were part of the efforts to stop the Franklin Dam. His mother worked on the Yes campaign when there was a referendum to turn Australia into a republic. And I think that is kind of the tricky thing for her. If she elevates him to the status of the heir apparent's boyfriend, she knows the British tabloid is going to come after him and come after him hard. And I think she's so damaged by her own experiences within the system that she doesn't want to drag someone she loves through the same thing. I won't say anymore because that will be a spoiler.
We talked a little bit about the fact that you had set this novel in Tasmania, but it is really a bit of a love letter to Tasmania in many ways. And so I guess I wanted to ask you if this was important to you.
Yeah, definitely. I've lived here for nearly 6 years now, and I was surprised how much I loved it when we moved here because I'm from Sydney. So I've always, lived in the inner city. So moving to a place that is very remote, but so beautiful. And there's so much nature around you everywhere you go. You look up and there's this beautiful, massive mountain. There's water. The river is just incredible. I felt like I reconnected to nature. And I thought that would be really good for someone who lives within palace walls where everything is very controlled. And, there's a methodology to everything. And suddenly she's in this rugged place where the winds howl off Antarctica and, you're right at the edge of humanity. I liked that feeling of displacement and isolation, but in a way that carries a lot of freedom with it. So, yeah, it is absolutely a love letter to Tasmania because I love it here. It's like it's living in a country town with all the benefits of a city. It is unbelievably beautiful, and the people here are just so lovely. And I think a lot of Australian authors choose Tasmania as a setting for many reasons. And I can see why, because it's just the most unique part of Australia.
My next question statement was going to be that Tassie writers are on fire at the moment. I mean, not only are Australian writers choosing to write about Tasmania, but Tasmanian writers are choosing to write about Tasmania. There is so much incredible Australian fiction coming out of this state.
I can totally understand why anyone who lives here or visits here thinks, damn, this is the perfect setting for a novel, because there's the wilds where so much can go wrong, places where everyone knows you and everyone is really well connected through history is really interesting as well. Like that's a really interesting setting for a character study because you can't really get away with anything. If you tell one person, everyone knows. It's just kind of like the perfect novel setting. You couldn't have invented it. You come here and you're like, oh, okay. You can write gothic novels here about the landscape. You can write romance, you can write crime. Like it is really one of Australia's just gems, I think. I totally understand why people want to write about it.
Beck, this is your debut novel, but did you always want to write a novel? And what did your journey look like from ABC journalist to novelist?
Yeah, I really wanted to be an author when I was a kid, but I thought I'm a very practical person. So I thought, oh, that doesn't happen to people. Like that doesn't happen to regular people. So I became a journalist because then you still get paid to write. And I've been very fortunate, the ABCs, I've been overseas and I've worked on a lot of things and they really have been like, you write what you want. If you can make it work for the audience, you do what you want. So I was very lucky. But as I said before, I got to a point where this novel was really just stalking me and it had to be written. I'd never had any ambitions for it to be published. It just needed to be on the page. And then once it was on the page, I just thought, you've got to be a little bit delusional in life to make things happen. So you've just got to try. So I spent about a year trying to get an agent without much success. I got a lot of no's. I was told the novel was commercially unviable by a publisher. And I really got to the point where I was going to give up. But I'm a member of the Australian Society of Authors, which I really recommend to everyone who wants to be a writer. So I did a lot of their courses and then I did the literary speed dating event, which is you get dropped into a Zoom call with agents and publishers and you can pitch your book and you've got like 90 seconds to do it. So it's very scary. I did about 4 rounds of that. And then I finally got interest from a publisher who said, send me the whole manuscript. And then they wanted to have a meeting. So then I knew I had to get an agent because I didn't know anything about this business and I just wanted someone to help me. So I went back to the agents who had asked for the full manuscript and, it was on their TBR list. It takes a while. And one of them was Gabby Nah. And so I emailed her again and said, can you put me at the top of your list and have a look? Because I just need some help. I think I'm going to get a deal, but I just need someone to help me. And so she said, okay. And then she signed me 2 days later. So after probably 18 months of just like heartbreak and nothing, she took over. And then within the space of a week, everything was different. She took me to HarperCollins and I got a deal and then we took it overseas. All it takes is just one person to say yes. And then it can all change overnight.
I love that for you, Beck. That is amazing. Now, as someone who's spent a fair bit of time reporting on the Royals, what do you think the reaction to the Heir Apparent in the UK is going to be? Or what has it been? I guess I should say.
A lot of publishers in the UK rejected it because they were like, we just can't risk it. I think Andrew's changing circumstances in the last few months have made any nervous people in my publishing house a lot less nervous. Look, I'm really interested to see. Everyone who was sent an advance copy in the UK has been actually really lovely about it and said they felt like I got it right. But we'll just see, like the focus was really on the US, where I think their view of monarchy is very different. It's just like a celebrity oddity for them. It's just fun. Where I think in Australia and the UK, it's a much more political conversation. So I haven't got much of a sense yet, but so far so good. No one said I've got anything completely wrong.
Beck, you mentioned that you were a member of the Australian Society of Authors and you did their online literary speed dating. So I wondered, did you have any other tips for writers out there?
Yeah, look, if I can do it, anyone can. Like, there's nothing really special about me. Like, I really think I just did not believe that this could happen. So I think you've just got to keep pushing because it's very easy to give up. And it's very easy to sort of be embarrassed by the perception of trying and failing. Like, I think that's an impediment for a lot of people. So I would say write every day or as close to every day as you can. Like if you've got kids or caring responsibilities or unpredictable shifts, that's not always possible, but it needs to be a practice. And it needs to be a habit. So make sure you build that into your life. Even if it's 10 minutes a day, that's fine. But it just needs to be as much a habit for you as drinking water and breathing. I would say join writers groups, find out other people in the community, do as many courses as possible, and then just work on your manuscript and keep going. You're going to get no's. You're going to be told it's never going to happen. So you need to be your best advocate because plenty of people are not going to believe in you. So I think it's just overcome the embarrassment of being seen to try because the world needs your book. And if you give up, then it won't happen. But if you don't give up, there's every chance that it will. And definitely do the literary speed dating event. It was invaluable. You can do a course before that where they teach you how to pitch. And I actually think that was the best thing I did because they teach you a lot about, genre and, who's your audience and what is the hook of your book and learning all those little things. I then understood why I'd been rejected so much because I was pitching it all wrong. I was saying the wrong thing. So plenty of publishers and agents were like, well, no, because she doesn't know what she's talking about. So I'd say you've just got to understand the industry that you're pitching to, and then your chances go up a lot.
Oh, that's wonderful advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. And on a final note, I wondered if there was one thing that you'd like readers to take away from this book. What would it be, Beck?
I think it's ultimately you don't have to be interested in royals to read this book, I don't think. It's ultimately a story about family, and all families are the same in a lot of ways. We all struggle with the same things. And I think this is why royalty is interesting to so many people because it's a way of talking about the issues in our own lives. Like they've got palaces and jewels and furs. And so it's a very luxury setting, but they're going through sibling rivalry. Like you think of what's happening between William and Harry, that happens a lot. It's a way of talking about grief, about the role of women in family. These are all things that affect us, just in a much less glamorous setting. So the one thing I would just hope you would take away is you do not have to be a royal expert or a royal fan. You can actually hate them and still enjoy this book. It is ultimately a story about a woman who's trying to figure out what's more important, family duty or personal freedoms.
So well said. Thank you very much. On that note, Beck, I wish you every success with what I know is going to be a hugely successful book and career. Thank you so very much for joining me on Talking Aussie Books today.
Oh, thank you for having me, Claudine. It's been lovely.
That's it for this episode, folks. Hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. If so, I'd love it if you'd leave a review on your preferred listening platform, which may include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Amazon Music. Until next time, friends, happy reading.